It's been 2 years since the October 7th attacks on Israel. On that day in 2023, Hamas fighters killed 1,200 people and took hundreds hostage. In response, Israel unleashed a military campaign that has brought death and devastation to Gaza. Now President Trump, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by his side, has unveiled a 20-point plan he says will bring a lasting peace to the region. On Friday afternoon, Hamas said it had agreed to release all Israeli hostages, alive or dead, under the terms and signaled readiness to immediately enter mediated negotiations to discuss the details, according to Reuters. Has a new path to peace been opened? Hello and welcome to USA Today's The Excerpt. I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today. To discuss where we are and what challenges remain, I'm joined by Michael Oren, a former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and a military historian. Thank you for being on The Excerpt, Ambassador Oren.
Good to be with you, Susan, and thank you for getting that right. They often introduce me as America's ambassador to Israel. You got it right. Thank you.
Yeah. President Trump called this one of the great days ever in civilization, potentially. Do you think that this plan can live up to that billing?
Potentially, yes. But to understand the import of that, you got to go back to 2 years. You got to go back to October 7th, 2023, with Hamas's horrendous attacks on Israel, killed 1,200 Israelis, and took 250 plus hostages. For the state of Israel, this was a profound emotional, physical, military shock. The state of Israel was founded 3 years after the Holocaust with the promise that would never happen again. And here it was happening again. And as a historian of Israel's wars, very few of these wars took place on Israeli territory. Most of these wars were fought out in the desert somewhere with Arab armies, Israeli armies, people in tanks, people in uniform. This was completely different. And the taking of hostages, Israel was sensitive in the past to the taking of 1 or 2 hostages. And so the state of Israel had never known a trauma like that. But we tend, in America, certainly today, we tend to focus on Gaza. But this was a multi-front war. At the same time that Israel was being attacked by Hamas, was being shelled by Hezbollah in the north. There were almost 200,000 Israelis displaced within a matter of days. And then rockets began to come in from the Houthi rebels in the Yemen. No one ever heard of these Houthi rebels before. Rockets and drones fired by pro-Iranian militias in Syria, in Iraq. Terror in the West Bank continued. So Israel was facing roughly a 7-front war, which was existential, of which Gaza was a piece, probably the centerpiece, but only a piece. And Israelis felt, and I think that there's often a mistake that this was all about Benjamin Netanyahu. I think 95% of Israel's decisions since October 7 would have been probably made by any prime minister. And I think probably more forcefully by other prime ministers, because Netanyahu has a very different reputation in Israel than he has outside of Israel. Outside of Israel, he's thought of being very aggressive, even warmongering and intransigent. In Israel, he's thought of as being very hesitant and conflict averse. So another prime minister may have been taken on much more aggressively, and Israel had to strike out on these multiple fronts. Gaza was, militarily speaking, a challenge unlike any army in all of history, not just modern history, has ever encountered. Because not only were there 30,000 very heavily armed Hamas, what do you want to call them? Guerrillas? I'll call them terrorists. But you had a population of over 2 million people crammed into a very narrow space. And beneath them, 500 kilometers of tunnels. Nothing that the American army, when it fought in Mosul and Fallujah during the Iraq War, fought against maybe 5,000 armed rebels in cities that were pretty much empty with no tunnels. So it was a completely different magnitude, which posed major moral questions. The question now is, one of the big questions that raised during this war was, well, what's the day after scenario? And a second question, certainly one that was raised by liberal Americans in the Democratic Party, why is America supporting this? Why is America supporting Israel's campaign, which was taking tremendous toll of Palestinian civilian lives? That was the claim. Israel claimed, in contrast, that we're doing everything possible to reduce civilian lives, but Hamas was hiding behind the civilians. And along comes this agreement, which is very different. And this agreement, first of all, recognizes the regional characteristic, regional nature of this conflict. It's not focused just on Gaza. It has many other parts to it. And the Trump administration succeeded in getting buys in from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, countries that don't necessarily agree on one another very much, and certainly don't agree on the Arab-Israeli thing or Israeli-Palestinian issues, and got them to buy in on it. And it put Gaza in a context, which is, okay, you can end the war. How do you end the war? Hamas says, either we surrender, we give up. They give back the hostages, and the process of rebuilding Gaza then becomes a regional undertaking with the United States involvement. And the process of restoring peace, not just to Gaza, but the entire region, including the possibility of Palestinian statehood, gets built into this program. So it's quite a vision. As a piece of diplomacy, it's extremely elegant. Will it work? That is the question.
Yes, will it work is the question. And of course, the price that Israel paid on October 7th was a terrible one. Since then, Hamas's medical branch says that more than 66,000 residents of Gaza have been killed in this military conflict. And one result has been to really isolate Israel in the world. And as a former ambassador, does that concern you, or do you think Israel will do what Israel will do regardless of what much of the rest of the world thinks?
Well, so that's probably three different questions. So let's unpack it a little bit. Let's go back to the 66,000. 66,000 comes from the Gaza Health Ministry. Nobody knows who they are. No one can name any person in it. It is Hamas. And those figures could be accurate. It could not be accurate. But one thing Hamas does not do is distinguish between combatants and civilians. And you know that as a journalist. And that's a very significant distinction, because Israel claims it has killed something in the order of 24,000 terrorists. And we actually have a very specific notion of that, because we have to take pictures of the terrorists we kill, because we have to make sure they're not hostages. And so you deduct the 24,000 from those 66,000, assuming that's an accurate number. You deduct the Palestinians who've been killed by Palestinian rockets that fall short. At least 20% of the rockets fall short. Two just fell short just yesterday. And they kill Palestinians when they fall short. And then the Gaza Health Ministry includes in that number all the Palestinians who have died by natural causes. So over the course of 2 years, out of a population of 2.2 million people, thousands of people die by natural causes. If you deduct all that from the 66,000, you're going to get close to a 1-to-1 combatant to civilian casualty rate, fatality rate, which has not been equaled by any army in modern history since records were kept. You can go on the Brown University site about this, and it will show that during the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts, the United States killed between 9 and 26 civilians for every combatant killed. So that's the first fact. Then the question is, why does the world ignore this? And those reasons are very, very deep. Especially, it's not the world, particularly it's in the West, and it's in the liberal West, and prefers to ignore this, because there's a narrative about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict where Israel is the oppressor and the Palestinians are the victims. And we could spend an hour or 2 hours unpacking that, but we won't. But let's accept that. There are deep anti-Semitic tropes in the West. They exist only in the West. They do not exist in India. They do not exist in China. And those tropes that go back to the Middle Ages say that Jews kill children. Jews kill innocent people. Whenever you cite the 66,000, almost always going to have the number of children in there, the number of innocent women in there, because Jews kill children. Underneath these accusations is the belief that Israelis wake up in the morning and all we think about is killing Palestinians for no reason. And there's almost like you have to understand why is this number being touted again and again. And the third question is, does it disturb me? Yes, it profoundly disturbs me. And I don't know if, even if we reach a peace agreement tomorrow and create a Palestinian tomorrow and sort of give up the West Bank and redivide Jerusalem, I don't know if it's ever going to go back to the way it was. An historic view will say that Israel, the Jewish state, enjoyed a certain interregnum from anti-Semitism for about 70, 80 years after the Holocaust. And the Holocaust has now been forgotten. And it's over. And I listened to American television. I heard things, including an interview with a very prominent author on CNN the other night, where he basically accused 7 million American Jews of distorting American policy in favor of Israel. Things that could not have been said 5 years ago, certainly even 2 years ago, without pushback from journalists. So we're in a different era right now. I will, as someone who engages in diplomacy and what's called track 2 diplomacy, I'll do my utmost to try to restore those relations, try to restore bipartisan support. I've basically given much of my professional career to maintaining bipartisan support, which is essentially collapsed in the United States today. My hope is that can be restored. but I have to be realistic about it. And we may not go back to where we were on October 6th, 2023.
Do you think that, just a yes or no answer, please, that anti-Semitism is the biggest reason for this criticism of Israel and its
Unquestionably.
actions?
Unquestionably. Let me ask you a question as a journalist. How much time have you spent on the civil war in Sudan? How much time did you spend on the civil war in Yemen? How much time did you spend on the civil war in Syria that took 500,000 lives? 500,000. There are conflicts that greatly, greatly dwarf what's gone on in Gaza. So what is the obsession? What is this about? The Israeli army has taken extraordinary measures to limit civilian casualties, something that no other army has done. Do mistakes made? There were horrendous mistakes made. Are Israelis human beings that make mistakes? Are there Israelis who act in a criminal fashion? Because there are criminals in militaries. There are, unquestionably. But if you were not an American journalist from a certain perspective, if you came down literally from Mars and looked at this, you'd say, here's a country that was unspeakably attacked without provocation by a terrorist group that was a genocidal group. It was a violently genocidal anti-Semitic group. Look at its charter. And Israel at the same time was attacked on multiple fronts. What would the United States have done? And it was clear in the early days of the war, certainly talking to people in the Biden administration, the United States would have flattened Gaza in a second, flattened it. You would have done what you did to Germany and Japan in World War II. You killed 400,000 Iraqis for an attack on the Twin Towers that the Iraqis had nothing to do with. Right? So you'd say to yourself, okay, yes, certainly anti-Semitism plays a huge role in this.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, respectfully, one reason we pay so much attention to what happens in Israel is because the United States was a very early supporter of Israel's creation, and the U.S. continues to provide significant aid and military support. And so I think Americans see their stake in this conflict. I want to ask you, though, going back to the 20-point plan, President Trump has said that he believes he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize for his actions in this region and other parts of the world. Do you think that's true? Do you think he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize?
I do. And I say it's not it's not a political thing. I'm just thinking, well, who the people get Nobel Peace Prizes? Yasser Arafat. He does. Listen, he brought about the Abraham Accords, which was transformative back then. He's done a lot since then. He's negotiated a peace for certainly an end of the fighting between India and Pakistan, which could have been far, far more destructive than anything going on in Gaza. And if this succeeds, and if the 20-point plan succeeds, he certainly deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. I can't think of anybody who would deserve it more. Again, historical perspective, no American president has succeeded what this administration succeeded in since George Bush Jr., okay, this is now George Bush 43, convened the Annapolis Peace Conference in 2007. Before that, no one has succeeded before his father, George H.W. Bush, who convened the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991. But it's considered that those two peace conferences didn't succeed. They both failed. So we have to see, okay, so now the administration has succeeded in getting a buy-in from all these disparate, in many cases, mutually inimical countries. And we'll see. If this succeeds, I think he definitely deserves a prize.
So you think no one could deserve it more? Do you think he'll get it?
I can't speak for the Nobel Prize. I think they've become very politicized, but that's just my observation. I don't know. But it's. I want to just stress again. If you look at the 20 points, you think, how could Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Israel, all agree to this thing? It's quite far-reaching. I think much of the credit goes to Jared Kushner, who has personal relations, and 90% of diplomacy is personal relations. And he's got a lot of credibility in our region on both sides. And it really showed up in this agreement.
Now, during the drawing up of this plan, Israel had a voice. The president talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu and others about it before. And Hamas did not have a voice in the creation of this plan. They weren't consulted. Do you think they should have been consulted? And also, we're waiting for word. Do you think they will accept this plan?
Yeah, I don't think Hamas has to be consulted. Hamas is a terrorist organization. And I don't think you actually have to consult them. I think the Hamas is given a very good deal here. It's got a get out of jail free card in this, which is very extraordinary. Here's an interesting story. If I can go on a little bit, I had a former student who's now a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And in November of 2023, he interviewed me, and I said, one of the solutions for Gaza would be to offer Hamas the same deal that Israel offered Yasser Arafat and the PLO in 1983 in Beirut, which is we let them get on a boat. They went off to Tunis, and we promised them no harm would come to them. We should make the same offer to Hamas: get on a boat, go wherever you want to go to Algeria, go to some place that supports you, or Turkey. And this was published in the Wall Street Journal, and what I got in Israel was ridicule. And why ridicule? My detractors, and not without justification, said, you don't know what you're dealing with. Hamas is not the PLO. Hamas is a jihadist organization that would prefer martyrdom, would prefer death to, abandoning Gaza under Israeli guns onto some boat. And I mentioned the story only because it's the same issue right now. What the 20 points offer Hamas is basically what I suggested back in November 2023. Get our boat and leave. Will they do that? Will they do that? By the way, those who stay have to take an oath, a pledge that they will abjure terror in the future. I don't even know how that pledge would even be framed, but is Hamas an organization that can do this? And if not, what are the ramifications?
One last question. You were the Israeli ambassador to the United States from 2009 through 2013. And, the kind of default position, the safe attitude toward things in the Middle East is to not be very hopeful about what's ahead. Can you compare kind of your state of hope now with what you saw you faced at the point that you left that job as ambassador from Israel in 2013?
Oh boy, that's a great question, Susan. I am actually much more hopeful today. I know that's going to sound crazy after 2 years, 2 of the most difficult years in the history of Israel, and certainly 2 of the most difficult in the history of the Middle East. Again, Syrian civil war was bigger. The Yemen civil war was bigger. A difficult period for the Middle East. And I think that's one of the reasons why all these countries have bought in, because they've had it with Hamas. Hamas created instability and violence. And what begins with Israel-Palestine in the Middle East doesn't end with Israel-Palestine in the Middle East. It becomes instability throughout the whole region. And they want it over. I look back at when I left Washington just before 2014. And at that point, the United States was on the verge of signing an Iranian nuclear deal, which Israel viewed as something close to an existential threat. And it would enable Iran to develop its nuclear program with full legitimacy and cover from the United States. And Hamas was building up immensely. Iran was using the money from this deal to give $1 billion to Hezbollah. And Hezbollah was acquiring a missile arsenal of 200,000 rockets. Some of them were very, very, very accurate. Hamas was much, much bigger. These militias throughout the region, the Houthis. And though the region had the appearance of stability, but it was anything but. It was anything but. Remember, there was that Syrian civil war going on just on the northern border. And you look at today, and the Assad regime is gone. That is a regime that killed hundreds of thousands of its own people. Don't forget about Israel. Think of what it means for the Middle East, that the Assad regime is gone. And that Iranian control of Lebanon and Syria is over. And there's a possibility of peace between Israel and Syria. There's a possibility of peace between Israel and Lebanon. The Iran nuclear threat has been much, much degraded. Iranian threat is much, much degraded. Hamas is virtually disappeared. And yes, there's a tremendous amount of reconstruction to do. But if I had to compare today to 2014, I'll take today over it a dozen times. A dozen. You weren't expecting that answer, were you?
I was not. Ambassador Oren, we'll always hope for hope. Thank you so much for joining us on the Excerpt.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. I'm Susan Page. I'll see you next time.